welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. The only podcast where it's okay to talk in band. On this podcast, you will be able to hear conversations with some of the greatest names in wind band conducting, composing, and arranging. We'll also visit with great college, high school, middle school, and elementary band directors to get their thoughts on various aspects of being a band director. We'll have regular check-ins with instrument specialists, music dealers, and instrument repair professionals. And if that's not enough, we'll even have regular conversations with Dr. Tim, who will help keep us motivated. That's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. And now, here's Charlie.
Welcome to this, our sixth installment of Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. And today we have another fantastic podcast for you. Joining us will be Erin Cole and H. Robert Reynolds. We'll get to them in just a moment, but first, I want to share an idea with you. If you're anything like me, you have probably had moments where you felt as though you were going stir crazy. It was like you were the star of the hit movie Groundhog's Day, and you can't tell the difference between Wednesday and Saturday. Well, you're not alone. There are literally millions of people who are feeling the exact same way. And many of them you know. Many of them may have been your former teachers or colleagues, someone that helped you get your start, or provided encouragement to you at some point in your career. Since you have some extra time at home now, this is the perfect time to reach out, to reconnect with them, to let them know you are thinking about them, and recall the times you had together. Try to remember a particular story that brings to mind how they helped you along the way. Conversely, if there was a time when you ended your relationship with a disagreement of some form, now is the perfect time to reach out and rebuild that bridge. You don't have to go into full apology mode. You can merely say that it has been too long since we talked, and I know we didn't end our last conversation on the best of terms, but I am calling, hopefully, to put that in the past. I want to know what's going on in your life. Robert Fulghum wrote a fantastic book in 1990 titled All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, and it was published by Villard Books. On pages 6 and 7, there was this little poem, All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And the first section of this poem reinforces today's idea. He says, all I really need to know I learned in kindergarten. All I really need to know about how to live and what to do and how to be, I learned in kindergarten. Wisdom was not at the top of the graduate school mountain, but there in the sand pile at Sunday school. And these are the things I learned. Share everything. Play fair. Don't hit people. Put things back where you found them. Clean up your own mess. Don't take things that aren't yours. Say you're sorry when you hurt somebody. Wash your hands before you eat. Flush. Warm cookies and cold milk are good for you. And the poem goes on. You can find it online and read it. But today, do yourself a favor. Call an old friend. Call somebody you may have hurt. Then flush, go wash your hands, and have some warm cookies and milk. You'll be amazed at how you feel. On today's podcast, we have two fantastic conversations. The first is with Erin Cole, who taught middle school band in Cobb County, Georgia for over 20 years. And then we'll go and have a wonderful visit with H. Robert Reynolds, who served as the director of bands at the University of Michigan for 26 years, and most recently has served as the principal conductor of the wind ensemble at the University of Southern California. Both of these conversations will offer you some great ideas and much to think about. That's today's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. We'll be right back.
Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends is made possible through the support of Hal Leonard, Eastman Musical Instruments, Con Selmer, and Vandercook College of Music.
It's a pleasure to have Erin Cole joining us on today's podcast, Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. I've known Erin for quite a few years, and she has a remarkable story to tell. And Erin, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm really glad you asked me to be here.
So Erin, many people may not know you, but so let's start right now. What are you currently doing?
So right now I am a senior educational consultant for Con Selmer. I'm also a communications specialist for their division of education as well. In addition to that, I'm also an educational clinician for Hal Leonard and a contributing editor for the Essential Elements Interactive program.
That's wonderful. And before that, though, you were middle school band director in Georgia, correct?
That's right.
So tell us where, tell us where. Tell us all about that.
Sure. So I taught in Cobb County, Georgia, just north of Atlanta, for 22 years at Tapp Middle School.
22 years at Tapp Middle School. So how many kids were in the program?
Anywhere between 450 and 500 typically. 6th through 8th grade, that is.
And did you do that all by yourself?
Oh, no. No, for many of those years, well, I'll be honest with you, my very first year as the head director, I was by myself for about the first half of that year. That was sink or swim, figure it out. But after that, we were very fortunate to have a fantastic music supervisor, Gary Markham, who made sure I got help. And I started off with one assistant, and then I got two. So for a long time, I had two assistants with me.
Well,
that was fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Erin, I know you grew up in a band family. Your father, Charlie Brody, incredible teacher, guy who's still active in the profession. And so now that you're a professional in your own right, you used to be called Charlie Brody's daughter. Now they refer to Charlie Brody as Erin Cole's father. What things do you remember from those formidable years growing up in a band director household?
That's funny. Actually, a lot. I remember a lot from those years. I mean, even when I was teeny tiny, I mean, we went everywhere with my dad's high school band. It was Hanover High School in Pennsylvania. And, you know, back in those days, it wasn't Bands of America. It was MBA, Marching Bands of America. And I just remember, you know, going to all the bus trips, all the contests, sleeping on the gym floor. I even remember when my dad was on staff with Spirit of Atlanta in the 80s. Probably the worst place for an 8-year-old to be is on drum corps tour in the summer. Learned a lot of stuff I shouldn't have probably. But yeah, good times. Good times.
So when was that moment that you decided that you wanted to be a band director?
You know, I always knew. I mean, there's pictures of me, they're actually pretty cute, where I'm standing behind my dad at like the age of 4 or 5 years old, conducting behind him. You know, it's never even a question. I always knew this is what I wanted to do. So even with my dad trying to talk me out of it, to be honest.
Well, he should have never done that. I'm going to give him the Dickens next time I see him. He should have never done that. So you became a band director, and did your dad give you a lot of advice and help along the way?
Yeah, I mean, when I would ask, he wasn't the type to, you know, get in there and just tell me how to do it. But I knew I had a fantastic resource just a phone call away. So, you know, all the time I call my dad, this happened today, or, you know, in tears, this happened today. What do I do? How do I fix this? You know?
So you made the transition from being a public school band director to now kind of being for lack of a better term, a corporate resource that's still in education, working with Con Selmer and Hal Leonard. What do you hope to transfer from your days as a public school teacher to your new role of being a consultant and a resource for these folks?
Well, I think, you know, a lot of what I do now are presentations at conferences and guest conducting. And even where I'll go out and do a program evaluation for a school and a band program. And I think, especially when I'm doing in-services and presentations, I want to be able to give teachers some practical takeaway tips that they can use in their classrooms immediately. But, at the same time, having those conversations and thinking about some tools they can consider for the future as well. And then when I do presentations, I do want it to be, as much as I can, interactive and entertaining. I mean, I think about Dr. Tim. I'm sure we all do. We all want to be like him, right? When we give a presentation. And I want it to be worth their time. I mean, I can remember, and you can too, I'm sure, sitting through meetings and in-services where it's just grueling, sitting through these things that have nothing to do with what you teach, at your own schools. And so I get that, and I want to make sure that it's worth their time. Guest conducting, though, that's a whole nother thing, which I love doing. Love guest conducting.
So,
but for that,
go ahead.
Well, for guest conducting, more than anything, I just want it to be a memorable experience for the kids. I want students to love the music they're playing, and I want them to have a great time. So I spend a lot of time when I get asked to guest conduct choosing the literature for, that particular honor band or all-state band, because I want it to be engaging for every section. Like, you don't want your percussionist sitting back there. They made an honor band not to sit, but to play, right? So just making sure I take the time to choose the right literature for each band. And it should be fun.
Well, we hope so. Hopes it's a memorable experience for the kids. Absolutely. So when you come into those kind of situations, whether it's a individual school band or an honor band, as clinicians, I mean, we always have our radar up. And so what's the first thing you notice when you walk into one of those situations? I mean, what do you notice?
Yeah, well, the first 15 minutes tells me a lot of that first rehearsal, I think, how they sound, their listening skills, their presence, all those kinds of things. When I say sound, I mean, the warm up, when I listen to what kind of sounds they're making, how strong are their fundamentals. And then the listening part of that is how well do they listen, or do they stop where you ask them to stop, or do they keep playing? What's the level of focus you're going to be dealing with that ensemble, so whether or not you're going to be able to detail a lot of things. And then with the presence part of it, I think about posture. Are they sitting up? What's the body language of the ensemble? Are they squirrely? Can they sit still? Are they excited to be there? I just think you have to read every ensemble and then go from there, right? And after this 15 minutes, this, I mean, you can already tell what pieces in the folder they're going to be able to handle just based on that.
So as a teacher and you've sent your students to honor bands, and I have sent my students to honor bands, what should we do as teachers to prepare kids for that honor band or guest conductor experience? What should we tell them?
Yeah, I think we have to educate them, right, on what that experience is about, because it's not going to be a 45-minute class period. It's going to require an attention span that's much longer than they're used to. But at the same time, it's going to be a fantastic experience where they meet a lot of new people. I mean, it's going to be a group of band geeks. Everybody that's going to be in that ensemble, most times, really bad want to be there, And I think about the imprint those types of ensembles, honor bands, and all states had on me when I was a kid. I mean, I still remember. I think of three that stick out. I had Jay Bocook. I'll never forget that one. Jim Croft from FSU, Ed Lisk. Those kinds of experiences, once you have such a great time, you're going to want to do it again. So I think preparing them in a way, what they can expect as far as rehearsal length, but also how positive that experience is going to be.
So as a teacher, when I'm, and you see this working with teachers, if you would give advice to every band director in their rehearsal, what are 3 things that they need to do in every one of their rehearsals?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's teaching the fundamentals. Not being in a hurry, establishing a great fundamental foundation is always key, I think. It's tough to correct once young students learn things incorrectly, right? So, in having a daily routine for your warm-up every day, and maybe that also means changing it up from time to time so they're still engaged and excited about what they're doing. But with young students especially, I think the students have to buy into that fundamental program and that warm-up process. So you have to explain along the way, why is it that we're spending so much time on this every single day and never compromising on that. So that's probably my first thing, is just making sure you're teaching the fundamentals. Second thing probably would be classroom expectations and procedures. That should just be part of the culture in your band room every day. And I honestly think that students thrive when there's a clear expectation and they know what to expect in your classroom every single day. They don't have to guess, and it's a safe and positive learning environment. And then I think probably the last thing is just be engaging. Know your ensemble, have high expectations, but don't maybe approach every single band class the same way. Every band's different. And spend time choosing great literature, because that's part of the engagement if they're excited about what they're playing. And again, it should be fun. So make it a class that they're running down the hall to get to every day.
I'm sure that now that the coronavirus, and you've obviously reflected back, man, if I was still in the classroom and I'd be teaching my band, what kind of thoughts have you had in terms of, if I were there, this is what I'd be doing?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. And I think all teachers right now are kind of just thrust into this with no warning. And for many people out there, they're now training on how to do this remotely. So many people, I think, are learning as they go. So the best thing I can think of, if it were me, would be to stay positive and just keep seeking out engaging and worthwhile lessons and activities. But to be honest, I think a lot of people right now are craving personal interactions. So again, if it were me, I'd be trying to find the tools and the things to use that create that. And I saw yesterday, the Cobb County School District, where I used to teach, actually did this, and they created a virtual band with band students all over the county playing one piece together. Super cool. And there's all these apps and things out there you can use to do that. And all kinds of resources too that you can go to find it, like NAFME and NAM have all their online teaching resources. There's Facebook groups. There's one called Music Educators Creating Online Learning. That's fantastic. There's so many resources out there, but I think, I would just try and get the students together as much as possible. Let's be honest, they know the technology even better than we do.
I know that early on, when we were developing the Essential Elements interactive program for the Essential Elements method, you were one of the proponents before you became a clinician for Hal Leonard and while you were still teaching at Taft. How do you think teachers can use EEI, or Essential Elements Interactive, during this time?
Yeah, so, it's funny because I thought about that. I was already using it when I was teaching. And if teachers were already using this and now they're in this time where they're having to do distance learning, this is the perfect tool. Number one, because it's free, right, if they use Essential Elements. But the music studio is fantastic because now students at home have access to all those background recordings on their computer, on their iPad. You can give them assignments. They can submit recordings of themselves to you to assess. You can use the grade book to give them grades with that. You can upload resources to the platform and they can access that. And one of the things I saw recently, Steve Smith at Hal Leonard has a blog. It's called eeiblog.com, and he specifically has a part on that website for just distance learning. And Hal Leonard does too, by the way. They have a distance learning on their website too. So, even tips and tools on how to use EEI more effectively right now.
So, Erin, when this is all over, when we finally get back to life as normal, or the new normal, what takeaways do you think teachers and students are going to carry with them? Will there be any differences to the way we teach band or we learn in band?
Yeah, so I think we'll all truly appreciate the importance of in-person interaction, right, and making music together. But, because we're thrust into this and having to learn the e-learning platforms and such, I think that eventually down the road, this will all be over at some point, but we'll have those tools to complement our in-person teaching. But at the end of the day, I don't think anything replaces students and teachers being together in person making music.
I couldn't agree more. Erin Cole, thanks for being with us today, and good luck in all you're doing, and I hope to see you down the road soon.
Thank you, Charlie.
I always enjoy talking to Erin Cole. She is just a dynamo. And if you've ever had the opportunity to attend a clinic that she's presented or watch her work a band or honor band, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I just love what she talked about, preparing our students for the honor band experience and those 3 fundamental things that we should do in everyday rehearsal. Great stuff. We'll be back in just a minute with H. Robert Reynolds.
Today's podcast is made possible through the support of Hal Leonard, publisher of the Essential Elements Method for Band and the Essential Elements interactive website that is free for Essential Elements users. Essential Elements Interactive, or EEI, is a state-of-the-art, cloud-based support program that is constantly evolving to provide you and your students with more information and resources to help them learn and have fun while doing so. To learn more about EEI, visit EssentialElementsInteractive.com.
I don't know many people that love music and music making any more than H. Robert Reynolds. He has this genuine interest in helping us all advance the profession. And he wants everyone to have and to create musical experiences that are at the highest level. I was so fortunate to be able to have a conversation with him on March 26, and I know that you're going to really enjoy it. Here is H. Robert Reynolds. It's a real pleasure to have our next guest join us for Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and Friends. He is the legend. He is the man. He is Professor H. Robert Reynolds, retired director of bands at the University of Michigan and worldwide traveler, conductor, musician, and friend. Professor Reynolds, thanks for being with us today.
Now, can we just get one thing straight right off the bat?
Yes, sir.
You can dispense with the Professor Reynolds, and you and I have known each other for so long. Please, it's Bob.
Okay, I'll do my best. Now, I had a strong, disciplined Italian father who always said to make sure you treat people correctly, Bob. But I'll do my best. And I was thinking about that the first time we had the opportunity to be together. Of course, I heard of you and knew of your great work, but you were kind enough to invite me to a seminar with 6 or 7 other young professionals at your cabin in Colorado for a week-long intensive score study, talk about music, learn how to grow up and act as a big boy in the world.
Yeah, we did that one, you and I, but then that went on for a while. So there were like 2 or 3 or 4, I don't remember exactly how many, because that came about because I kept looking at workshops and conducting things and so forth, and everything was for the emerging conductor. And there didn't seem to be anything for the mature conductor, the person who had already achieved a lot, that could get together with friends and talk about things in depth and with significance and so on. So that was the genesis of all that.
Well, it was a week that changed my life, I can tell you that, and I recall it to this day.
Well, I do too.
So thank you.
It was great fun.
So I trust you're at home in Ann Arbor, hunkering down through the coronavirus.
True enough.
And had that not been the case, you'd probably be out busy traveling the world. I know that
I don't know the world, but
go ahead.
I don't know the world, but there's a number of things, and I should be right now. I should be at USC conducting the wind ensemble there, but USC is of course closed.
Yeah, and I was going to be there with you next Friday night for that event, but life has changed.
It certainly has. So, and all the other guest things I was doing in April have been canceled also.
Well, hopefully we'll be back on track sooner rather than later.
Yeah. So right.
So I knew you grew up in Pennsylvania, and did you always know you wanted to be a band director?
Not always, but from a pretty early age, I did. My grandfather told me, and my mother told me, that I was going to get the most fantastic Christmas present. And so I thought it was going to be a bicycle or a baseball glove or something, I really wanted a tent. I don't know, some guy thing. And so when I went down on Christmas morning, what they had for me was an E-flat alto horn. And I tried desperately not to show my complete disappointment in that. But my grandfather was a self-taught musician and self-taught band director. He did other things for a profession. He was in the monument and tile business and did quite well at that. But he taught me my first lessons. And then I kept going, and somebody, my band director, convinced me that I really shouldn't be playing the E-flat alto horn. I should be switching to the French horn, which I did.
And so was that Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, that was what I did in late junior high, early high school.
So when you were in junior high and high school, did you ever imagine what your career was going to look like?
Never. I just like making music. I just like playing the instrument. And I remember one time I was sitting in a rehearsal, and I had it was an early rehearsal, and I was just learning how to read rhythms and so forth. And so it had 2 eighth notes, and I knew that there were 2 eighth notes to the beat. And so I played eighth notes like da-da, da-da, da-da. That's 2 eighth notes to the beat. so somebody told me they actually had to be equally divided. So I learned a lot along the way.
And we've heard a lot of bands that still have that problem to this day. So you mentioned, I think you mentioned at one time that you had some family that went to the University of Rochester or Eastman or something like that.
Well, nobody went to Eastman, but my father, my grandfather, and my great-grandfather all graduated from the University of Rochester, the home base of Eastman.
Okay.
But they were all in other fields. My father was in the journalism. My father was the editor of the University of Rochester yearbook, and one of his assistants, if you can believe this, was Jacob Javits.
Wow, famous senator from New York.
Absolutely, was assistant to my father on the yearbook staff. And my best friend in high school was a trombone and cello player and quite a fine musician. His father was my band director, and he went to Eastman. So I should have gone to Eastman.
So what made you choose the University of Michigan?
Well, first of all, I didn't choose the university. I didn't choose Eastman because my band director kind of helped me, said, you should play in district bands and all-state bands and all-state orchestras and so forth. So I started doing that, and I really enjoyed it. And I got pretty good at it. And I was, in high school, I was kind of a hotshot horn player. So during my early senior year, I was playing horn and principal horn in the all-state orchestra. And we were doing the Hanson Romantic Symphony, which has a lot of horn solos, and the conductor was from Eastman. So at one of the breaks, he came up to me and he said, "Young man, I think you do very well at Eastman, and I hope you consider that." And I thought to myself, if you're the main conductor at Eastman, that is the last place I want to go. But he wasn't the main conductor at Eastman. He just thought the classroom music ed. I don't know why he was conducting. I just assumed if he was conducting the Pennsylvania All-State Orchestra, he was the top dog conductor at Eastman. So I went to Michigan by accident.
Okay.
My high school band director, who was quite good and helped me a lot. And I tried to convince my mother and my family that I should go into music because I loved it so much. And my high school band director said, "Well, there's this music camp up in northern Michigan called the National Music Camp at Interlochen. Why don't you send him up there and see how he does and see if he likes it? It's 8 weeks, music all day long. And we'll see if he is fed up with it by the time he comes back or how well he did and so on." So I did that. And so while I was up there, I noticed that a lot of the really best musicians were going to the University of Michigan. And I didn't know where to go, but I thought if all these really good players were going to Michigan, that must be a pretty good place. So I applied to go to Michigan and got in. So I went to Michigan to be the best high school band director I could be. And I went there without ever knowing who the band director at Michigan was.
And that band director obviously was Dr. William D. Ravelli.
Absolutely. Yep, I learned quickly who he was.
So what was your first interaction with Dr. Ravelli?
Well, it was before that, actually, because I thought of myself as a hotshot high school horn player in Pennsylvania. I showed up and played an audition. I thought it went quite well. And as I was walking down the street to go to where they were posting the results of the auditions, people were congratulating me. So I thought, well, I didn't expect to be first chair right away, but it looks like that's what's going to happen. So I went down and I looked at the list, and in the top band, the symphony band, there were 8 French horns, and I was 8th. I couldn't imagine there were 7 better players than me. Until I showed up. I thought I should get there a few minutes early to, find my place and get set and so forth. And I barely got there in time to start the rehearsal, because what I didn't know was Ravelli always started his rehearsals early. And his famous saying was, to be early is to be on time. To be on time is to be late.
Yeah, and we've all
we were
used
always
it.
Early.
And we've all used that a million times.
Sure.
So I'm sure that you have a million Dr. Ravelli stories. You got any you could share?
Sure. Yeah, a few. I mean, first of all, I want to say that every story you've ever heard about Ravelli, the best ones and the worst ones, they're all true. And I sat there for 5 years in his group. And the group was fantastic. I mean, filled with really wonderful, wonderful players. And he had the habit of, if things weren't going right in some section, he would what they call go down the line. So he would, start with the first player and go down the line and listen to players play. And if they weren't playing, he'd criticize them and moving them around, and they'd move up and down and so forth. So one of his favorite pieces that we did, I want to say every year, but I'm sure that's not true, but frequently, we did Toccata and Fugue in D minor of Bach, a Leitzen arrangement. And it starts out with the horns in unison playing an E, top space E. So somebody in the section of our 8-member section, and I was 8th, remember, went, cracked it. So really they said, okay, horns, let's hear it. So the first horn player went, bum. The second horn went, third horn, the fourth horn came down to me, and I went, bum. He said, okay, move up to second chair.
Just like that.
I was no more the second, just like that. But I was no more the second best player in that section. It was crazy. Well, then, 2 or 3 more days later, I was back down to 8th. So we just kept moving around. The other story I'll share is, there are some negative ones that I don't want to share. But one of the ones I do want to share was, this was a big day for the Strobocon, which was the windows that spun and, could tell whether you're in tune or not. Now they do it on the phones, of course, but this was done. And so he had one right behind his podium. And so he was picking on me that day, and he said, okay, Reynolds, play an F. And I was in line so I could actually see the Strobocon. So he pointed at me and said, play an F. And I went, dong. And by the time he turned around to look at the window, I had made the adjustment to stop the window. So I was in tune. He said, okay, play a G. I played a G and did the same thing, adjusted the thing. And then some of the people in the flute section started to giggle because they knew what was happening. They knew I could see the windows. And by the time he turned around, I had made the adjustment. And so pretty soon the whole front part of the group was not trying to stifle their laughter because they knew what was happening. But I had, in a sense, I had gamed the system.
Did he ever find out?
No. I didn't tell him. I don't think anybody.
That's probably a good thing, right?
Anybody else did. Oh, absolutely. No.
So you graduated from the University of Michigan. What was next for you?
Well, I graduated twice from the University of Michigan. I graduated with a degree in music, in instrumental music education. And then I went out and taught for a year. I should have taught for more of that, but I taught for a year. And then I went back and did a master's in horn performance. Because I figured one degree in music ed was sufficient, and I wanted to get a degree in a different kind. It was actually wind instruments, my master's, so I had to achieve a higher level in trombone and tuba and trumpet, as well as horn. But that year I went out, the first year I went out to teach was in a place called Onstead, Michigan, southern Michigan. It was a community of 600 people. But there were 1,000 students in the kindergarten through 12, but most of those students were bussed in from farms in the area. And I remember my mother was concerned that I was going to be successful or happy, or when you know how mothers are, they're concerned about their kids, and so she called me, and they had set me up with a roommate by the name of Gene Duell. And I still stay in touch with him. He and I have been good friends for all those years. And so this was before cell phones, before dial phones, before almost anything. And the town of Onstead had a town operator. So you would call the town operator and give her the number of where you wanted to be connected, and the town operator would connect you to that number in town. And this is a true story. I'm not making this up. My phone number was 6. And when my mother called, I told her I'd written a letter and told her how to do this, and she called and she said, I'd like number 6. And the town operator said, would you like Mr. Duell or Mr. Reynolds? And she said, Reynolds. And the town operator at that point said, he's not home right now. He's at band rehearsal. He'll be home about 8:30. So you didn't do much in that town that everybody didn't know about. Oh, I was also, in addition to that, the second basketball coach. Gene Duell, my roommate, was the head basketball coach, and I taught junior varsity basketball and played on the Onstead town basketball team.
Geez, Michigan should have hired.
First job.
Michigan should have hired you after they got rid of Beeline, huh?
No, that coach is doing okay.
Yeah, he's doing good. You're darn right. So you go from Michigan and you end up in California.
Right.
And so what was that motivation? How did that happen?
Well, Ravelli periodically in rehearsals would comment like those, so-and-so, I just got so-and-so this job at here, and I just got so-and-so the job over here, and I got a so-and-so the job over here. And he was very proud of that. And I can understand that. Everything was right about that. But I didn't want to find out at the end of my career that I had either been successful or unsuccessful because of Ravelli. I felt I needed to do it myself. And so he had never said, I got this job for this person in California. So I just went to California.
And you were at Anaheim High School?
Well, yes, I was, but that's not. I applied for jobs. Of course, there was no internet or computers or anything like that. But so I got information about jobs in California and applied for a job in the Long Beach school system. And they told me that we can't hire anybody just on the basis of an application, but your resume looks quite good, and we'll hold this job for you until you come out for a personal interview. Which I did, and I interviewed with them, and they said, yes, you can have the job. It's a 6-month substitute job until the regular teacher gets out of the armed services. And I said, I can't accept that. So I was in California, married. My wife was about ready to deliver our first child. And I said no to that job. And the person was very nice. I interviewed. I said, well, where would you apply for a job? And she said, well, I hear there's a lot of jobs open in Orange County. You might try the Orange County Department of Education. And she gave me the name of this woman who I still remember her name. I never met her, name of Erin Cole. So I called Erin Cole and said, do you know of any jobs in Orange County? And she said, yes, I think they're looking for a band director at Anaheim High School. So I interviewed there and got the job. So that was my, I told you there were 1,000 students. kindergarten through 12 in this first job I had
Uh-huh.
at Anaheim High School. At Anaheim High School, it was a 3-year high school. There were 1,000 students in each grade. It was like starting over.
It was like
It's
culture
crazy.
shock.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there were 10,000 people showed up for a football game.
Amazing.
At a football game in Onstead, they had little wooden stands that nobody sat in. People from the town just walked up and down the sideline following the ball. So anyway, we tried to develop a pretty good band at Anaheim High School and did. And I followed a guy who was quite good. He had a medical issue which forced him to retire. But he was very helpful to me, and I appreciate him so much. In fact, the auditorium at that high school, Cook Auditorium, was named for Bill Cook, my predecessor there. Quite a fine gentleman.
So we could spend quite a bit of time talking about your successes in California, and then you went to the University of Wisconsin, and then you end up at the University of Michigan. So just in the interest of time, and maybe another conversation we'll talk about those California, Wisconsin days. But you go back to
we should, at some point, we should talk about the Long Beach State days.
Well,
those were interesting days. But
go ahead. No, go ahead. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, my first college job was the second band conductor at Long Beach State. They'd had only one conductor there, John Green, who was a great, great person. A person more like Abraham Lincoln than anybody I've ever known. Anyway, he became chairman of the department, and so they wanted to hire a second person. So they hired me. They were looking for either a brass person or a percussion person. And it came down to two of us, myself and Bob Winslow. Bob Winslow was teaching at Santa Monica High School, and I was teaching at Anaheim High School. Bob Winslow then went on to UCLA and then North Texas and became quite a fine band conductor. But it came down, and Bob Winslow's Santa Monica band was actually better than my Anaheim band. And I was playing a lot of French horn at that time, playing Pasadena Symphony and gigs around and doing a lot because I didn't want to stop playing. But Bob Winslow was subbing with the LA Philharmonic. So his credentials were better than mine. And I figured that the reason I got the job was because the head of the music education department at Long Beach State, his name was Bob Winslow. And they didn't want two Bob Winslows on the faculty at the same time. Anyway, I learned a lot, and I had great, terrific students. We thought it was good at the time, but we didn't know how good. The trombone player who played trombone in the concert group played bass drum in the marching band. He later played bass trombone, just retired not too long ago, played bass trombone in the LA Philharmonic.
Wow.
First trumpet player, Burnett Dillon, you've heard a lot. Everybody's heard a lot because he's played most of John Williams' movies and all kinds of movie things. Alan McMurray was in that band. Eugene Corporon was in that band. Karen and Richard Carpenter were in that band. Karen played percussion and Richard was the pianist.
Amazing.
So we had some, and Wes Jacobs, who was later a tuba player with the Detroit Symphony, was in that group. I mean, it was something. So I learned a lot, and they learned a lot. And we were doing something. We were playing the Hindemith Symphony, and on the back of the score or the cover of the parts was this other piece by Hindemith, concert music for wind orchestra. I didn't know anything about it. I asked the group, does anybody know about this piece? No. So we decided we'd just order the piece and read it through to see what it was like. Well, see, it's one of the major contributions to wind literature. So it was like that sort of exploration. But I learned a lot from that group. I learned a lot. And I learned a lot from John Green, my mentor and predecessor there.
So from Long Beach, you went to Wisconsin.
I went to Wisconsin, absolutely.
And then from Wisconsin, go ahead.
And in each case, from Anaheim, I took the second band at Long Beach State. My Anaheim High School band was better than the second band at Long Beach State. When I went from Long Beach State to Wisconsin, my Long Beach State group was better than the University of Wisconsin. And this is going to be a shocker to you. When I went from Wisconsin to Michigan, my Wisconsin band was better than the Michigan Symphony Band. I can tell you why that was, but it shouldn't have been that. It shouldn't have been that way. But
yeah, I know that reason too, but we're not going to go there.
Okay. All right.
So you went back to the University of Michigan.
Yes.
What kind of pressure did you feel, or did you feel any?
Oh, no pressure whatsoever. It was easy as pie.
Of course, Dr. Ravelli was still alive at the time, correct?
He was still alive, and during those first few years I was there, I had him guest conduct a group every year.
That's great.
Yeah, because I thought that's what should happen. So.
And was he free to give you advice?
Oh, he gave me a lot of advice, and there were times when it wasn't pleasant to hear. In fact, he did it one time in front of a whole group of people, of my colleagues.
Oh boy!
And I went to his office the next morning and said, "We have to have a talk about this," because he was complaining that the marching band director, because up until that point, the director of bands, including him and the person that followed him up until me, had been also in charge of the marching band. And I thought, I didn't want to do it that way. I thought there should be a specialist doing the marching band, and I would specialize in the concert music and oversee the whole band program. Well, he thought that was wrong. He said, there's more people know who the marching band director is than know who the director of bands is, and that's not right. I understand his point, but what I said in return, which I don't think he appreciated, was, well, there's more people know who the football coach is at the University of Michigan than know who the president of the university is. But that doesn't diminish the value of the president of the university. So we didn't always agree, let me put it that way.
So
there was pressure because people expected immediately they'd hired a Michigan guy, and they expected an immediate transformation from what it had been before I arrived to what it could be.
And how many
took a while.
And how many years were you at Michigan, Bob?
26.
Wow, that's great. Wow.
Yeah, I had a great time. I mean, I got a call at the end of my first year from the University of Wisconsin because they'd hired people to come in and guest conduct for a certain amount of concerts, and so they didn't hire a regular person in the first year. So they called me at the end of the first year and said, are you happy at Michigan? And I wasn't, and we'd like you to come back. Well, I didn't think I could go back. I didn't think that was the right thing to do. I was told by his people, I value their opinion, that you just can't go back. So it took 3 or 4 years. The first 3 or 4 years I was at Michigan to make it what I hoped it would be.
Well, and it became the cornerstone for bands and band music nationally, and it still is held in the highest regard ever, as you well know. So Bob,
it was a challenge though to change the culture from what it had been to what I wanted it to be.
Uh-huh.
In fact, I had some students who I value, who are friends of mine now, who came to my office the first year and said, this is not going well. We expect you to hold our feet to the fire. When it goes well, you come down on us, and, et cetera, et cetera. I said, well, that's not the way I do it. I said, you come back and see me, 6 months from now, and we'll talk again. And 6 months from then, they came back and said, okay, now we understand what you're doing. But it took time to change the culture.
And patience is not. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had to persevere during that time and felt that I knew philosophically that I was doing the right thing. Yeah, and that happened primarily because I read a book when I was at Anaheim High School. And the book was of the title of Music and Music Making by Bruno Walter. And one of his major tenets was, if you treat people with hostility and anger and so forth, it'll either result in their resistance or their lack of ability to make music. I'm paraphrasing. That wasn't the direct quote.
That's a great
book.
book.
I should tell you, it is a great book, and I value it highly. I should tell you a side story. Sorry to get off the subject here, but in my very first job, I got a present from my Onstead high school band at Christmas time. And I thought that was very nice. It was a bright red ski sweater, and inside it was a card, signed by the band. And the card said, "Here is a sweater to match your temper." And that got my attention because I was doing it the way it had been done to me. And I didn't change that until actually I read that book by Bruno Volter. And that changed my whole philosophy about things. And I've never been sorry about that.
Wow, that's great. So I'm going to change the subject here a little bit. I was talking to our good friend Gary Green on a previous podcast, and he mentioned that after he played Ingolf Dahl's Sinfonietta with his high school band, he later heard a recording of David Maslanka's A Child's Garden of Dreams, and that piece of music kind of changed his life. It altered his direction. So was there one work that changed Bob Reynolds' life?
Yeah, but I almost hesitate to say what it was.
Oh, go ahead.
Let me give you a background on that piece of music. Not on the piece of music, but on why it convinced me. When it was my mother, and I'm an only child, and my father died when I was young, so it was just my mother and me growing up, and she was not really in favor of me going into music. Can't make any money in music, and so forth and so on. We all like music, but it's not for the future. So I was parking the car in the garage, was maybe 30, 40 yards behind the house. And so as I was walking into the house, I kept saying to myself, she's just got to see it my way. She's just got to see it my way. And when I got in the house, she said, "What do I have to see your way?" I said, "I've got to go into music." And that happened because I was listening to the car radio to a group called the City Service Band of America. And that's long since gone. Paul Laval was the conductor of that group, and they had a weekly radio program. And the thing that really turned me on was the Queen City March. And I think that did it. I mean, I don't know why I still remember that, but I don't think after that there was any other single thing. There was another fork in the road for me, because I did both band and orchestra, except at the first job at Anaheim High School and so forth. I did band and orchestra all the way through. And when I was at Anaheim High School, I was playing a local symphony and so on. They had a conducting workshop sponsored by the conductor and the organization, and I wanted to do that because I always like to do things like that. And they had this, the conductor of the Pasadena Symphony, Richard Laird, who was for that time, famous conducting pedagogue. So he did a conducting workshop. And we were each of us, the four of us, each did a movement for Brahms' Fourth Symphony with the orchestra. And so after I finished and so forth, and there was a performance, he saw me at the end. He said, "Young man, I think you can do something as an orchestra conductor, and I'd be glad to help you." And I said, "I'll call you on Monday morning." And I knew I was facing a fork in the road at that moment, because I was going to have to make a decision. Did I really want to be an orchestra conductor or a band conductor? Because I didn't have to make that choice up to now. I was doing both and happy to do both. Well, it was clear what decision I made. And the reason I made that decision was because, I knew that if I were an orchestra conductor, I'd have all this great repertoire, I'd enjoy my life tremendously, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I didn't want to think when I finished my conducting career that I wanted my life to mean something. And I didn't think as an orchestra conductor, they would just fill my spot with another orchestra conductor and go on. But I thought I could help the band move from where it was to where it could be.
We'll be back with more Bob Reynolds in just a moment. Right now, I want to thank you, the listeners, for your support of Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and Friends. I've really appreciated the comments that I've received. And if you have a suggestion or someone you'd like to hear interviewed on the program, please send me an email at bandtalkcharlie@gmail.com. Let me also take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, Hal Leonard Corporation, Con Selmer, Eastman Musical Instruments, and Vandercook College of Music for making this podcast possible. We simply cannot do it without them. And now, let's get back to our conversation with Bob Reynolds.
One statement here, because I don't want to leave this out. Way back to when I was auditioning for Michigan and was eighth horn. Then in the intervening years, I started moving up. And I looked up and down the line and I saw that the next year there was be nobody ahead of me. Therefore, I was going to be principal in both the band and the orchestra. And so I practiced over the summers, came back and played a great audition. Again, went down and looked at the board and I was second. And worse than that, the person in front of me was a freshman. And worse than that, he was actually better than I was. And he is still a very close friend of mine. We became roommates. I was best man at his wedding. And he retired probably 6, 7, 8 years ago as principal horn of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra.
So, Bob, throughout your career, you've had and you continue to have interactions with some of the greatest composers and musicians of our time. So when you have those interactions and you have those experiences, what responsibilities do you feel and what memories do you take away from those?
Well, that's a big question. I think that band and wind ensemble conductors need to hang out as much as possible with composers, even more than other conductors. Composers look upon music differently than conductors and interpreters. They look upon the music as a piece of music. We somehow have learned to look upon it as a series of problems that need to be overcome and how to rehearse them and how to make the E-flat, clarinet, piccolo, and oboe play in tune in unison and issues like that. So we're looking for rehearsal strategies and so on. Composers look at music completely differently. And so hanging out with them gives them a perspective. I remember I got a big lesson one time. We had Erin Cole come to Long Beach State, and we played Emblems, second performance of Emblems, actually. And so he was there, and I was rehearsing Emblems and got to this one point, and I turned around to him and I said, now I know this spot should go a little bit faster, but I just feel it slower. And he said to me, if I were conducting, I'd go faster. But I don't want you to go faster. I want you to go at the speed that feels right to you. That was a huge lesson. Not that I wasn't breaking the music. I mean, it wasn't, misshaping it or anything, but it was a permission to do what I felt was right. I've got a bazillion stories about composers because I love hanging out with composers and interacting with them. And I made a list here when you gave me the list of questions. So,
Bob, you're married to an incredible lady, Kristen, who is a terrific oboist in her own right, an outstanding musician.
Absolutely.
So what have you learned from her about being a musician?
Well, I've learned that you should be, and this is not something I didn't have already, but she highlighted it, that you should be really nice to the players. You'll get more from them if you are good to them. That doesn't mean you have to be their buddy, and hang out with them and have a beer with them afterwards or so on, but you have to be kind to them. You have to shape your words of improvement so that they feel like you're on their side, because she reacts to because she plays a lot of professional things around. And she always, one of her first comments is, this conductor is really good to us. He can bring out the most in us. And it's always because the personality of the conductor is not challenging their respect. It's feeding from the respect. So that's the main thing.
It's a great lesson.
I've also found out what a really good oboe sounds like.
Okay, so let's say that you're playing golf and you get a mulligan, you get a do-over. Is there any one moment in your career you'd take a do-over on?
There's a few moments. They're the same kind of moment, but there are a few moments. And the moment for me, and I don't know how to describe this exactly, but I'll make an attempt at it. My wife and I have been married almost 30 years, and I would have waited for her. I should have waited for her. Instead, what happened is I got married too many times because I was putting all my energy and all my focus on my profession. I was trying to be successful, and that caused all kinds of issues. So waiting for her or having a balanced life. My early life was not balanced. It was too much professionally oriented.
That's great. That's wonderful. Yeah. So
it wasn't wonderful at the time, but go ahead.
No, it's just wonderful advice for people because they need to hear that. We all need to hear that. We're so much more than our job, and we need to be more than our job. Yeah. Yeah.
So my advice to people would be, when you're home, you should be home and not at your job.
So speaking of jobs, what are we doing better in our profession now than we ever did?
Things. The groups are much better. The players are much better. I mean, groups around the country are playing almost at a professional level. I mean, it's remarkable how good they are. It's crazy how good they are. I think that's a big thing.
And what are the next steps? Where do we need to take this?
Well, the reason they're so good, it started, during Ravelli's time, actually, because he and some other people thought that band contests would help raise the standards of bands. And they were right, because band standards were really low, because they, concert in the park kinds of things, and a few players get together and play badly out of tune and so forth. So those band contests help bands improve greatly. And what's happened is that same positive influence of contests has been the downfall of bands now, in my estimation. I think what we should be doing is making music the highest priority, not making cleanliness the highest priority, because you can keep rehearsing and rehearsing. You can never stop rehearsing all the things that need to be corrected. There's always something more that needs to be corrected. And people think, well, when these things are all in order, then I'll get to the music. That's not the way it happens. It's like saying, when my left arm is fully developed, then my right arm will grow. All these things in music grow together. So I think we should be making should be more important to the music teachers and conductors to be really good musicians themselves and listen to music that's not band music. There's nothing wrong with band music, but they need to broaden out beyond that, and then be as musical as possible. I did a series of lectures for the Texas music educators a few years ago, and they wanted recommendations. And so one of my recommendations was add a judge at the festival. And all that judge's responsibility would be is to adjudicate the depth and significance of the music making, because that is the thing that's missing the most.
And it's evident when you hear groups. You can hear that.
Sure. It's like, my analogy for this is like the purpose of poetry reading is not to read all the words correctly. It's to find the meaning inside the poem and bring out the meaning of the poetry. And it's the same thing in music. You've got to find a meaning in the music and bring out how it feels. I hope there's time to I'll try to make this as brief as possible, and then you can ask questions. But there are two kinds of knowledge. There's objective knowledge, which comes with like math and language and science and so forth, and you can evaluate that. You can put it on a spreadsheet, you can grade it, and everything is right about that. There's another kind of knowledge called intuitive knowledge. And intuitive knowledge is, how do you know that something is beautiful? How do you know that you've fallen in love with the person you want to spend the rest of your life with? That you don't choose that person because they got 8 out of 10 on the checklist. You choose them because of the feeling that's transmitted because of intuitive knowledge. This just feels right. And so there are very few things in teaching music in the schools that promote intuitive knowledge. And so we have to go in that. So how music feels is extraordinarily important. So I think that's where we need to move in that direction. It's kind of the last frontier.
Yeah.
How does the rest of the music world make music? How do the great singers make music? Be one of those.
Yeah, I've been watching this Ken Burns documentary on country music, and it's been fascinating because of the very thing that you're talking about. It's just, though it's a different genre, a completely different genre, the whole thing about being soulful, authentic, from the heart expression.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Be real.
Yeah.
My aunt, bless her soul, not alive anymore, obviously, but my aunt used to get great joy in painting by the numbers. I don't even know whether you remember that.
Oh,
but it used to be, you get a grid and you'd say, okay, you paint this light blue and you paint this dark green, you paint this yellow and you paint this, and they would have this artwork which didn't have any color on it. Suddenly, if you painted by the colors, by the numbers, then it became a very colorful artwork. Now, she knew that wasn't art. It was like advanced coloring. But somehow we're doing the same thing very often with bands in making music. We're making music by the numbers. Get this right, now get this right, now get this right. And you don't want it wrong. I mean, you can't just let bad intonation and terrible precision go by. But I observed one time at the University of Michigan, Kurt Mazur, the famous conductor of New York Philharmonic and orchestras in Europe, was rehearsing the University Symphony Orchestra. So, of course, I went. And he would rehearse in a different way, in that he would rehearse what he wanted to hear musically. And then if something interfered with that, like wrong notes or bad intonation, then he'd feel like he had to go on. I don't want to be diverted, but I have to, correct this lack of precision here. So, but the motivation for the rehearsal was to make the music. And then he got sidetracked from time to time because he had to do the other thing. And somehow our purpose in a rehearsal is to make it perfect.
Yeah. No, that's great. I've used the analogy with students. I'll go to the whiteboard and I'll sign my name. I'll just sign my first name, Charlie. And I said, and I'll take the marker and then I'll sign my name again. And I said, can you tell that those are the same signature? And they'll go, yes. And I said, are they exactly alike? And they said, no. And I said, that's right. And that's the way they're supposed to be. I said, but when I hear you play, so often we go to that first signature, and then the second time we try to trace it, and we do such a bad job of it. So we're trying to make it perfect. We bring tension to our playing. We make wrong notes. We don't allow the music to live.
Right. Good. Right. So you can't make the same crescendo the same way every time. You can't make the same retard the same way every time.
Right.
Yeah.
So what ideas have we moved away from in this wonderful profession? Anything
What we moved away from?
Yeah, that we need to bring back.
I don't know if there's anything we moved away from. I think we just have to go. We have to be more musical. We have to be like the rest of the world making music.
Yeah.
And we're not. Hang out with composers.
Hang out with composers. Okay, last question, because you've been so gracious with your time. So what advice would you give a 21-year-old Bob Reynolds?
Go into music. It's ideal. You get to do what you love and you get paid to do it. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be the director of bands at the University of Michigan to be happy and to contribute. And I guess I always felt when I got to Anaheim High School, I was in my last job. It's just other things happened. But the thing I mentioned earlier is the advice I'd give a 21-year-old, and that is have a balanced life. Don't let what happened to me happen to you.
Bob Reynolds,
so
you are my dear friend, and I treasure the time we get to spend together. I treasure those phone calls I get from you every once in a while, and the ones I make back, and having the opportunity to be with you always makes my life richer. And you've made a lot of people's lives richer by having the opportunity to know you and study with you and to play under your baton and to hear your beautiful music. So please give Kristen my love.
I will, and back at you, Charlie.
Well, thank you. Give Kristen our love, and Wanda joins me in sending our best to you, and we'll hope to see you soon.
Okay. Nice to chat with you.
Bob Reynolds. Wow. Every time I have the opportunity to talk to Bob, I come away a more thoughtful musician and a better person. He is really a treasure to our profession, and we all owe him a great deal. Well, that's it for Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Next week, we'll have a conversation with Dr. Tim and Scott Rush, who share some information on their new leadership book, Pathways to Success. We'll also have an in-depth conversation with the principal trombone of the New York Philharmonic, Joe Alessi. And we'll wrap up next week's show with a conversation with Dr. Rob Franzblau, who wrote a book on what you can do as a teacher to help your students major in music. That's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. If you would like to send a question to Charlie or have a comment, please send an email to bandtalkcharlie@gmail.com. We hope you will let your colleagues, students, and friends know about Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to being with you again soon.